Good evening and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Rebecca Munro and this is Scotland at 7. Now, apologies for this slightly later start. We had a few technical difficulties, but today I am joined by James Dornan MSP. James, how are you this evening?
I'm good, and my apology for being the technical difficulties.
No, it's no problem at all, but you can hear us now, so we're all good to go. So before we get started on the questions, we'll just do our daily coronavirus update. So as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 2,372,004 people in Scotland have tested positive through NHS Scotland labs and UK Government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 2,048,716 have been confirmed negative and 323,288 have tested positive. There are 2,086 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There are 19 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 7,772. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 543 were in hospital last night, 47 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 3,956,549 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 2,927,130 have received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 128,593 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 63 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. So our first story of the day is that dozens are dead in missing German floods. At least 38 people have died and dozens are missing or awaiting rescue from rooftops after heavy rain and floods caused buildings to collapse in two western German states. Up to 70 people were reported missing after several hours collapsed overnight in Schuld in the Eifel mountain range in Rhineland-Palatinate. Across the state, 18 deaths were confirmed by mid-afternoon today. The full extent of the damage in the region was still unclear after many villages were cut off by floodwater and landslides that made roads impassable. Videos posted on social media showed cars floating down streets and houses partly collapsed in some places. In the neighbouring western state of North Rhine-Westphalia, at least 20 people have lost their lives in the floods, including 2 firefighters who drowned during rescue missions. In at least 4 separate incidents in the cities of Cologne, Solingen and Unna, people died after being trapped by the floods in their cellars. In Leverkusen, a hospital with 468 patients had to be evacuated overnight following a power failure after the River Duin breached its banks. Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel said she was distraught by the news of the floods. My sympathy goes to the relatives and of the dead and missing, she said, during a trip to Washington. The death toll is expected to rise. So, James, this is absolutely devastating, and we're now living in an era of climate change where this extreme weather is only presumably going to get worse. So do you think that this will serve as a kind of wake-up call for governments that they have to start or need to start speeding up their climate protection measures?
Well, you wonder how many wake-up calls some governments are going to need. It did surprise me. You tend to think these things happen in countries far away, but of course there's been floods in London recently, nothing like what there was in Germany, that tragedy in Germany with so many dead, but it's happening all over the world. I think that what we need to do as a country is our bit in terms of the climate change, but also look to see how we can help to mitigate when things like this happen, how we can help to protect people and how we can help to protect, to make sure that the resources are used as beneficially as possible.
So do you think then that climate and environmental policies are going to be something that we start seeing more and more prominent in election campaigns?
Well, to be fair, the last one, the First Minister made it sort of like the major part of our platform, that everything that we do is going to have that environmental policy behind it. We've now got a net zero minister, so it's become central to everything that the SNP government is doing. But we are a very small part of a machine that has to change, if we're going to be able to tackle climate change. And the UK government have to take it much more seriously than they do just now. And obviously, I suppose China, India, and the US are the three that we need to be looking at to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, it is a case that sometimes, we'll call it a tragedy, and that it shouldn't happen, but in the end, nothing actually really ends up happening or changing.
Yeah, yeah, a wee bit like school shootings in America, where after it we all genuinely are horrified, but then nothing happens, and later on the same thing happens again, and then you do worry that what happens in situations like this is that we are horrified, and we're pretty horrified now that there's so many dead. The last number I heard was 44. So many dead in what we see as, a first world country, a country with the best economy in Europe, and this sort of thing can happen. So we have to. It's a wake-up call for everybody, but we have to take this very seriously, because if it can happen in West Germany, well, in the western part of Germany, then it can happen anywhere in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll move on to our next story, which is the UK poverty crisis and Boris Johnson's levelling up. Boris Johnson has been accused of guilty and empty rhetoric over his so-called levelling up plan by the SNP Westminster leader, who warned the Prime Minister that you can't level up by making millions of people poorer. Responding to the Prime Minister's speech, Ian Blackford MP said Tory austerity plans to slash universal credit payments by £1,040 for 6 million families from September. And this proved that the Tory government had absolutely no intention of building a fair recovery. Mr Blackford said the only way to keep Scotland safe from Tory cuts is to become an independent country with the full powers needed to secure a strong, fair and equal recovery. It comes as new analysis from the House of Commons Library, published today, revealed the UK has the highest poverty rate of any country in North West Europe, and has done for almost all of the last 20 years. A report from the Institute for Public Policy Research, published in May, found that the UK's relative poverty rate among working households has hit a record high this century of 17.4%, with 1 in 6 working households now languishing in poverty on Boris Johnson's watch. Commenting on the reports, the SNP's Work and Pensions spokesperson David Linden MP said that the UK is suffering from a growing Tory poverty crisis with the worst levels of any country in North West Europe. The Glasgow East MP said Rishi Sunak's plans to slash universal credit payments by £1,040 a year for 6 million families and impose a public sector pay freeze will inevitably make this crisis even worse and push more people into the hardship and deprivation. There must be an urgent U-turn. He went on to say that the cold, hard reality is there will be no fair recovery at Westminster, and that the only way to keep Scotland safe from Tory cuts and build a fairer society is to become an independent country, with the full powers needed to secure a strong, fair and equal recovery and eradicate poverty. So, James, how can Johnson's government be levelling up if they are scrapping the £20 uplift from universal credit at the end of the year?
It's rhetoric and nothing else. Boris Johnson is by far the worst proponent of getting by the moment. As Prime Minister, you've never seen, he talks long term in theory, but his practice, it's always about making sure that he can get by the next press release, he can get by the next 24 hours. That speech today is a deflection from the devastating policies that have been brought out recently about cutting foreign aid, about some of the other policies, the immigration bill, about dropping the £20 universal credit. This is about him trying to pretend that he cares, and the reality is that he cares not a jot. I mean, my colleagues have been talking about independence, and of course we need independence to give us the opportunity to create the sort of society that we think is fair. But they have no intentions down there of levelling up. What they see as levelling up is their friends and their family getting even more contracts so that they can be as rich as the richest one in their group. They do not care at all about the people that are suffering in the northeast of England, or the people in Scotland, or the people in Wales. So it's rhetoric and absolutely nothing else.
So what is the rationale behind the cuts then? Do you think there is any? Is it just personal?
Well, you see that there's no doubt there's some really hard decisions are going to have to be made by the Westminster government, right? The COVID, the pandemic has played havoc with everybody's finances, every country's finances. There's no arguing with that at all. But the hard decisions that the Tory party, the Tory government are going to make are going to be hard decisions for the poor. They're not going to be raise the tax rates for those above a certain amount. They're not going to be about taking money back from those who have benefited so much from what the Tories have done over the last number of years. It's going to be cut £20 off the universal credit. It's cut foreign aid to the poorest people in the world. That's the sort of country that we're going to be in. It's going to be the poorest people, the people who can least afford it, who are going to be paying the biggest price for Tory inaction.
Yeah, and will this also impact the benefits of the Scottish Child Payment and what the benefits that they bring?
Well, Scotland is, there comes a point where Scotland can't mitigate everything that the UK do. Because we live off a settled budget, we know that, and what we have to do is we have to move money about. So we shouldn't fool the people, and to be fair, the government don't, but people should be aware that if the UK government continue to make cuts, the Scottish government are going to find it impossible to fill those holes. Now, how it's going to affect these payments, I don't know. The Scottish Government have been very good so far at mitigating the worst of Westminster cuts. But another £20 off of universal credit, it's a lot of money in Scotland. I'm sure that the government will find ways to accommodate it, but this can't go on. And that's why independence is so dreadfully important for everybody, because the sooner we can control the tax and benefit system that we have ourselves, and we can bring in a minimum wage income guarantee, then the better it would be for everybody.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, I was going to ask you, what should Scotland do to try and mitigate it? But I suppose your answer is just independence then, yeah.
Well, it's not, you see, it's not, it can't be, right? That can only be the first step. Independence only gives us the opportunity to make a difference. Independence on its own doesn't give us anything, except for the right to make our own decisions. Scotland could become independent, we could vote in a Tory government like the one in Westminster, and we'll just have the same. But what I would expect is Scotland would vote in a left-of-centre social democratic government that would be looking to benefit the people who need the help most. I would say that's the SNP, but it doesn't really matter. I think the people of Scotland would vote for a government that knows who needs the help. And those who need the help are not those who have the most, they're those who have the least.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, we'll move on to the next story, which is on the record number of families impacted by the two-child policy and rape clause. Campaigning SNP MP Alison Thewlis has renewed calls for UK ministers to scrap the two-child policy and associated rape clause, following new figures showing a record number, over 300,000, are missing out on vital income due to the policy. The UK government statistics show that over half of those impacted, 56%, are in work, and 1,330 women have been forced to disclose details of rape under the rape clause. The Glasgow Central MP has campaigned to have the two-child policy limit that restricts entitlement to benefits to the first 2 children per family to be scrapped since it was first announced in the 2015 UK budget. So, James, do you also believe that this policy should be abolished?
First of all, can I just say that Alison has done a wonderful job in keeping this at the front of the news agenda. She has worked tirelessly for people who are affected by this. But to be honest, my response could be a rerun of my last response, because this policy, again, is just one of those policies that shows what sort of government that we have down there. We have got the leader of the House has got 6 children. We've got an MSP who was a Tory MSP, but was even more right-wing than the Tories, Ballantyne, and I can't remember her first name. She was claiming that if you can't afford them, don't have them. Because we all live these simple, straightforward lives where that's how things work out. Now, that's the sort of people that we're talking about in the Tory party. They don't. This is about penalising those at the bottom to try and save some money. And it's never about taking from those at the top who can afford it. It's always about those at the bottom who need it the most.
Yeah, and it's often those at the bottom that are affected the most detrimentally about these kind of policies. I mean, how many people have been affected by this?
I don't have the figures for that, but all I can say is that I know people who live chaotic lifestyles, who live. What you find here are families who are maybe have abused. The woman in the family may well be abused. She may well have children by more than one partner. She may well have been going, living a lifestyle that Tories don't recognise, but is just a part of everyday modern life. And they're penalising those people because they don't fit into the boxes that they live in. Of course, they all have they can hire somebody to do that sort of thing in the privacy of their offices, unless there's CCTV there. But that's not how normal people live. And I think it's just another sign of Tories penalising the poor whilst they look after their friends and family.
And it's not just the poor, it's also specifically women. I mean, the 7 justices found that the rule did have a greater impact on women, but said that there was a reasonable and objective justification for it on cost grounds. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, can we do everything then on that basis? Because then what we could do is we could scrap Trident, right? Because when are we going to use Trident? If we're going to use that as a basis for everything, then I'm happy with that. But if we're going to use it for the ones that affect those who are going to be most badly affected, then I think it's a hypocritical use of legislation.
Yeah, and as well, I mean, the fact that 1,330 women have been forced to disclose details about rape and have to relive their experience, and I mean, is that just completely almost inhumane to make them go through that under scrutiny?
Rebecca, I know personally, and I know people well who have been assaulted, who have been raped, and for them to have to relive that, to make sure that their children have got enough to eat, is just vile beyond belief. And only a completely and uncaring government could even contemplate that. I can't believe that people would say, yeah, this is fine. They'll ask a few, they've been through it, doesn't mean anything. They'll ask a few questions, they'll get their money, what's the issue? I think it's like they don't recognise how humans feel. And to be fair, I think I know how that is right enough, but it's awful that they would even contemplate doing this.
Yeah, well, we'll move on to the next story, and that is that data officers raid 2 properties over Matt Hancock's CCTV footage leak. 2 residential properties in the south of England have been raided by data protection officers as part of their investigation into who leaked CCTV footage of Matt Hancock kissing an aide in his office. The Information Commissioner's Office said it had seized computer equipment and electronic devices as part of the operation on Thursday morning, amid an ongoing investigation into alleged breaches of the Data Protection Act. Footage of Hancock kissing Gina Coladangelo inside the Department of Health and Social Care's building was published by The Sun last month, prompting the former Health Secretary to step down from the Cabinet and leave his family to set up home with his aide. Hancock was said to be unaware there was a camera inside his office. The security company MCOR, which provides CCTV services to the department, reported itself to data protection investigators and said the footage was taken from the government's CCTV system without consent. Exactly how the footage, which was recorded on the 6th of May, ended up travelling from the Health Department's internal CCTV system to the media is unclear. The ICO has said it is investigating a breach of Section 170 of the Data Protection Act, which covers the disclosure of personal data without consent. This section does contain a protection for otherwise unlawful disclosure of data in some circumstances if it was justified as being in the public interest. So, the security company have said that the footage of Matt Hancock was taken from the government's CCTV system without their consent. I mean, is this not quite worrying for all workplaces that use such systems as well?
I find the whole thing amazing here that nobody knew that they were getting watched by CCTV in the first place. That there was CCTV. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this did take place in his office. That's what I think anyway, that it took place in Hancock's office. And if it took place in Hancock's office, why has a cabinet secretary got a camera looking at what he's doing in his office? I mean, I could understand why there's cameras outside or whatever, but I can't see how somebody who should be dealing with secrets, although to be fair, it turns out that he's just emailing an ordinary email and stuff so that nobody else can FOI it. But why would they allow a camera in and I don't mean him, but the Parliament allow a camera in an office where people might be able to find out what it is that he's doing? So that in itself I find very strange. The fact that the Tory government don't want to have an investigation into this stinks. And then there is the whole thing about somebody made money out of. I suspect somebody's made money out of leaking this to the media. Now there are all sorts of theories going around about why this was done, internal Tory politics, whatever. But my big issue with it is that the government refused to have an inquiry into why there was cameras in there, what other cameras are in place. Surely somebody in the government knows how many CCTV cameras are in people's office. I mean, I find it impossible to believe that that's a normal thing, even in Westminster. It sounds more like something that Tricky Dicky would have done back in the Watergate days.
Yeah, no, you would think, wouldn't you? So, and I mean, the reason Matt Hancock resigned when The Sun published these compromising images of him, but oddly, he resigned for breaching social distancing rules and not for having an affair. I mean, is this par for the course Conservative morals these days?
Yeah, I would never comment on people, their personal business, right? I mean, people. Yeah. My issue with this relationship is that it looks like, if I remember correctly, there was a bit of a furore when she got the position in the first place, and it looks like that she got that position because they were, in quotes, very close. He should have been sacked because he was a hypocrite, and I mean hypocrite in terms of he's telling the world to stay in, to keep your distance, no social mixing, and then he's behaving like this. So he was right to go. He should have went immediately. But having said that, he shouldn't even have had the chance to resign. If there had been a strong, firm Prime Minister, he would have got rid of him right away. But of course, he's the one who was going around shaking hands after and boasting that he was shaking hands after the COVID virus was out there. So he can't really, and to be fair, if we're talking about morals, he's not really the Prime Minister to be lecturing anybody on that, is he?
And do you think as well, I mean, do you think people might actually be quite emboldened by seeing this, by thinking, oh, well, if he can do it, why can't we?
I don't think that, I mean, there will be some people think that, but I don't think that there's anybody in the UK now that believes that the rules are the same for us and them. They know that the rules are different for those at the top end. It's never been clearer in my lifetime, and I'm 68. I've never been clearer that the rules are different for those at the top and the rest of society. And most people will understand that. They won't like it. They'll be very angry, particularly that people have missed out on their loved ones dying in hospital. And yet he hires his university friend who he ends up, or he turns out to be having an affair with. That hypocrisy of the highest standard.
Yeah, there just seemed to be quite a bit of corruption running throughout certain places.
Listen, right through it.
Yeah, and I mean, is yes, allegedly, but is the Information Commissioner's office, essentially hamstrung? Because if the leak is considered a genuine public interest breach, the culprits have potential to be spared prosecution. I mean, what's your take on this?
I think it's without a doubt in the public interest to see that whilst they're telling you to do one thing, they don't mean it. They don't think it affects them. They clearly think that the virus has got a sort of class indicator, and it will only touch the poor and working class, and the rich, then that won't be affected. That must be the way that they think in Westminster, or else why is it different rules for us and different rules for them?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll move on to the next story, and that is the Brexit bureaucracy hitting Scotland the hardest. Figures show that Scotland's trade with the EU is being hit the hardest as a result of the UK Brexit deal. Speaking at international trade questions in the House of Commons today, SNP MP Drew Hendry warned how Scotland's exports are facing a kamikaze blow as a result of Boris Johnson's botched Brexit agreements. Analysis from Warwick University's Dennis Novy showed the UK's overall trade performance with the EU had fallen by 27% during the first quarter of 2021, with Scotland's trade fall even higher at 29%. The SNP's shadow international trade spokesperson Drew Hendry MP said that Boris Johnson's hard Brexit has been a disaster for Scotland from the outset. It is savaging the Scottish economy with mountains of added costs, red tape and barriers to trade with our European neighbours, a market 7 times the size of the UK. Mr Hendry said, the stats don't lie. For every £245 that Brexit costs, our new trade deal with Australia will recoup only £1. And if we ever conclude a trade deal with America, which looks less likely by the day, it would only recoup a mere £10. He added our deal with New Zealand would only recoup 50 pence, and our deal with Canada would only return about £1.50. The pattern is clear. Our exports are facing a kamikaze blow. So, James, do you agree with Drew Hendry's recent analysis that, 5 years on, there are still no tangible benefits to Scotland being out of the EU?
We could be having this discussion in another 20 years. It would be exactly the same response. I can see no benefits to Brexit. That's why the people of Scotland voted overwhelmingly against us leaving the EU. Every right-minded person, I think, at the time realised that this could only damage the UK's economy, but clearly Scotland's economy was going to be badly hit. For us to be the worst, I suppose that would be because some parts of England might have might have benefited to some degree, but then you look at the other parts of England and they're losing massively as well, or they've lost. Some might have lost less than we have. But with Scotland's fisheries and the food and drink industry that we've got here, then we were bound to be losing a lot of money, a percentage of our income through this ridiculous Brexit deal. It still is we have this discussion almost every time I'm on here, right? Because it's ongoing and it'll be ongoing for some time to come yet. But it's still the biggest the political suicide thing I've ever seen a country commit. Anybody that would put their country through what the Tory government have put us through, the people who voted Brexit because they were lied to and told they were going to get back control, but don't worry, things will be great. We'll have deals with everybody next Thursday, and here we are. We're still talking about. I don't think we've concluded one. I think with I don't know, Liechtenstein or something. So we're 5 years on, 6 years, nearly 6 years on, and we're no better off, and that's how it's going to be for some time to come. Somebody should pay a price when there's a change of government. We'll be independent, but for the people of England, they should be looking at those who lied to them, and they should be holding them to account. And not just, in my view, not just through the ballot box. You shouldn't be allowed to break the law and lie and cause people to lose fortunes, lose their jobs, lose their houses, everything that goes with poverty. You shouldn't be allowed to do that and then just walk away scot-free, whilst at the same time, you're telling your clients to put their money in Dublin. To put their money outside of the UK because the UK is going to take a battering. We go back to that word hypocrisy and us and them, and Brexit is a shining example of that. They'll benefit and we'll lose.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the hospitality. I mean, Scotland is internationally renowned for kind of high quality food and drink. Yeah. Do you think the Tory government is unintentionally or intentionally cutting off Scotland's prosperity and future economic recovery just completely at the knees?
I'm not sure how intentional it is, but I on another front, I'm doing something similar. I think a lot of this is unintentional, but through lack of care or thought. They don't see, I've been saying this now for 30 years or so, that the problem with being part of the UK is not that in London, although things have changed recently, but not that in London they deliberately try to do Scotland down. It's just that we weren't on the radar. You know, the southeast of England was the driver for the UK economy, and so therefore most of the resources and most of the thinking was about how we can benefit the southeast of England. Scotland was an afterthought. Now it's the only time they think about Scotland is when we're causing trouble, when we're a pain, and here we go with this independence nonsense again. Don't they understand how well off they are under our umbrella? And that's the only time they give Scotland a thought, particularly this government.
Right, well, we'll move on to the next story. And that is that Putin plot to put Trump in the White House. The Guardian is reporting that Vladimir Putin personally authorised a secret spy agency operation to support a mentally unstable Donald Trump in the 2016 US presidential election during a closed session of Russia's National Security Council, according to what are assessed to be leaked Kremlin documents. The key meeting took place on the 22nd of January 2016, the paper suggests, with the Russian president, his spy chiefs and senior ministers all present. They agreed a Trump White House would help secure Moscow's strategic objectives among the social turmoil in the US and a weakening of the American president's negotiating position. Russia's 3 spy agencies were ordered to find practical ways to support Trump in a decree appearing to bear Putin's signature. By this point, Trump was the frontrunner in the Republican Party's nomination race. A report prepared by Putin's expert department recommended Moscow use all possible force to ensure a Trump victory. Western intelligence agencies are understood to have been aware of the documents for some months and to have carefully examined them. The papers, seen by The Guardian, seem to represent a serious and highly unusual leak from within the Kremlin. There is a brief psychological assessment of Trump, who is described as an impulsive, mentally unstable and unbalanced individual who suffers from an inferiority complex. There is also apparent confirmation that the Kremlin possesses compromat, or potentially compromising material, on the future president collected, the document says, from Trump's earlier non-official visits to Russian Federation territory. So, James, if The Guardian's report is correct, do you think Putin did indeed help put Trump in the White House, and if so, why?
I mean, this hardly comes as a shock to everybody. There's been talk about the Russian Putin being involved in this for some time, and you can see why they would want to have baby Huey in the White House, because if you've got somebody who is so easily flattered, you can manipulate them. And Russia and America are still playing this game of the Cold War, not in the way it was, but they're still trying to be the big shots. And I think this was Putin seeing that he's got another way of being influential and trying to make sure that America do things that are going to benefit Russia as opposed to America. I mean, I would think that the only defence that, in my honest opinion, the only defence that Donald Trump has against treason is insanity. The things that we saw over the last number of years showed clearly that what he was doing was working. I thought anyway that he was working against the best interests of the United States of America, and so this doesn't surprise me. The compromat thing doesn't surprise me either. Was it Steele? There was a Steele report, I think it was, that talked about this before, although I know that it was meant to have been debunked, but it sounds like the same sort of stuff as we're talking about here with what Putin has signed off on. So I'm not surprised Russia did it. I don't believe that Russia are the people that do this sort of thing, but I'm not surprised they did it in this case. And I can see easily that it's better for them than to have a strong, sensible leader in the United States. If what they're trying to do is mix things up, if they were in a strong position themselves, then they would probably want somebody more sensible in America where they could work as equals. But just now, Russia's not in the place that the USSR were, so I think it's better for him if America was in turmoil, which without a doubt, unfortunately it was and still is because of Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I mean, is it not slightly concerning as well that hostile powers can infiltrate democracies and deliberately sow seeds of dissent and disruption?
Yeah, they've been doing it forever. You know, the problem is now that with the internet and social media, all the benefits that come with it. There's all the downsides as well. But you know, we've always had people going in villages. And back in the old day, where people would go in and they would spread rumours and they would try and bring people down. And this is just a modern version of that. It's much more complex, and you can get to a lot of people much quicker. But that's modern day society. It's very dangerous, but it's not new. It's just been done in a higher level and with much more efficiency.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll move on to the next story, and that is that 4 arrested over online racist abuse of England footballers. Police have arrested 4 people over alleged racist abuse directed at England football players online, while warning other perpetrators that they will be tracked down. After England's Euro 2020 final defeat to Italy on Sunday, black players Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho and Bukayo Saka were targeted with racist abuse after missing penalties during the match. Those detained included a 42-year-old man arrested on Wednesday by Cheshire Constabulary on suspicion of displaying threatening, abusive or insulting written material that is likely to stir up racial hate. Greater Manchester Police arrested a 37-year-old man on suspicion of an offence under the Malicious Communications Act. And West Mercia Police detained a 50-year-old man on suspicion of inciting racial hatred. The UK Football Policing Unit, which works with the Home Office and the National Police Chiefs Council, said it was running a hate crime investigation and had submitted dozens of data applications to social media companies. So, James, I mean, do you think that these men got what they deserve and kind of got what was coming to them in the end?
What happened after the game? What happened through the tournament was quite disgraceful, and before the tournament, in terms of this. England, one of the great things you can say about the England team is that it's multicultural. You know, there is not some of the drawbacks there is in some other countries about playing black players and stuff. And it's fabulous to see. I mean, most of their best players are originated somewhere else. I mean, Raheem Sterling was born in Jamaica. He's there. He was their best player, in my view. He was their best player during the tournament. But to those 3 young boys, and they are all young boys, came on towards the end. They weren't even in the game for very long. Missed penalties. They're not the first players to do that, including the England manager. So what happened there was just pure racism. I mean, it was like they were looking for an excuse to have a go at those players. And as soon as the floodgates opened, then there was lots of people going on it. And we were talking about the internet a minute ago, and this is one of the really, really downsides of it, is that these online bullies can sit in their basements and throw abuse at people they would never dream of throwing abuse at if they were in front of them. I mean, can you imagine these? You can see them now sitting in their basements with their England shirts and their huge bellies and sort of like confronting one of these people face to face. It's horrible that they could do this. And these people are people. Marcus Rashford. He's somebody who anybody would be proud to have as a member of their family. He's done more for England recently than almost any other individual. And these morons are racially attacking them because they say they think they're superior because they're white. I mean, break your heart. Yes, whatever punishment they get, they deserve every single bit and probably a fair bit more.
That's right. I mean, yeah, it's incredibly disheartening. I mean, the fact that the National Police Chiefs Council is having to run a hate crime investigation, I mean, it's good that they're doing it, but it's sad that they have to.
You know, you sometimes have to look at the date in your calendar to see what year it is, because sometimes you think that you've not moved on at all. You think you have. You know, if you want the truth, for me, this all goes back to Brexit. I've been like Brexit for everything, including the rain when it rains. But it created a climate that allowed these cockroaches to pop back out again. You know, they were hiding, and then the language that was used in Brexit about foreigners and others and the xenophobia that was used, and then they allowed, you know, people thought that was okay. And then we get to the stage where after, Black Lives Matters, it's all about equality. And we get people saying, I'm not doing that, and using the Marxist excuse, when really it was, I don't see why we should be doing this just because a black guy get killed in America. And that's how, in my view, that's how they look at it. And I think it's absolutely astounding that we're in 2021 and we've got a government that didn't just allow it, and to some extent encouraged it with the comments that both Priti Patel and Boris Johnson made. Booing is freedom of speech. So, like monkey chants and stuff. I mean, it's just awful, awful, awful.
Yeah, well, we'll move on to the next story, and that is addressing the challenges in the construction sector. Business Minister Ivan McKee met with representatives of the construction sector today to discuss how industry can ramp up the manufacturing of construction materials in Scotland and find solutions to challenges facing the sector as a result of the UK's exit from the EU. At a meeting of the Construction Leadership Forum, Mr McKee re-emphasised the Scottish Government's commitment to work with the industry to source significantly more materials locally, which will help address importation challenges. James, I mean, with the best will in the world, from bricks, plasterboard, Velux windows, the UK the EU not only provides the construction industry with skilled labour, but also, really good products. And due to our location as well, I mean, there's some things that we simply just can't make here or make, in a big variety and loads of produce. So, we can start increasing manufacturing, but should we not be fighting harder to not relinquish valuable contacts in Europe?
We won't be doing that. I mean, Ivan is very on the ball. I mean, he is one of the most impressive of the ministers, I think. He knows business inside out. He will be making sure that all the contacts that we have, that we previously had, we'll be keeping. We'll be using them as best they can, and I've got no doubts that some of those contacts in Europe will help us to source stuff outside of Europe. But we have to live in the world we're in. A world we didn't create, but we have to live in the world we're in. So all we can do is seek out as best we can other contacts, whilst at the same time ramping up the manufacturing. And in the long term, how good would it be if our manufacturing base has grown considerably because of the horror that is Brexit? I mean, that could be of long-term benefit, but in the short term, we're going to have to still try and get stuff in from elsewhere to make sure that we can continue to build the houses that we've promised to build.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll move on to the next story, and that is that funding to help the food and drink sector to recover from the COVID impact. A fund to help regional food and drink ventures recover from the impact of COVID-19 has awarded £200,000 to a range of projects across Scotland. The Regional Food Fund, one of the Scottish Government's 100 Days commitments, will help producers and event organisers showcase quality regional food and drink products. Managed by industry organisation Scotland Food and Drink, the fund is designed to contribute to the sector's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and assist the development of food tourism-related projects. A total of 42 grants of up to £5,000 have been made to stimulate creative, innovative and collaborative projects. Ventures include a regional food group of more than 30 businesses in Argyll and Bute, where funding will support the growth of off-island sales, while in Fife, the Bowhouse market will expand to help more local food and drink producers gain access to an alternative route to market. The grants were announced by Rural Affairs and Islands Cabinet Secretary Mary Gojan during a visit to the Shetland Rural Centre in Lerwick. So, James, this is some good news then, isn't it? Especially for a sector like hospitality that really has been greatly affected by COVID.
Oh, it's very good news, and what I like about it is that we are making kind of seed money available for the producers themselves to make more of. We're not saying you've lost money, here's something to make up for some of the money that you've lost. We're saying here's an opportunity, or here's a hand to try and help for you to grow your markets again and maybe go elsewhere and look for new ways of doing things. And I think that's kind of like what the future should be. I think government's role, I mean, it's different through the pandemic, right? But I think in the main, government's role should be to facilitate, and let the businesses find their own feet, but give them that helping hand, because they know we don't know business. They know business. So I think that funds like this are exactly the right way to do it. We can have experts in place to assist them, but I like the idea that we're saying, here you go, give us something innovative, and then there's money here to support you get that off the ground.
Yeah. And I know that you've said that you would blame Brexit for the rain, but do you think that Brexit alongside COVID has also exacerbated the struggles of the hospitality sector?
Well, I didn't want to mention it again, but yes, of course, yeah. That is the big cloud that hangs over us.
Mm,
So maybe it is responsible for the rain, but it hangs over us all the time. Everything that goes wrong, and I'll tell you, this might sound ludicrous, but the Tory party have benefited from the pandemic in terms of politics because, you know, there's over 150,000 people have died,
mm.
and yet this man has been able to say, but you know, we got the jag out. You know, everybody's getting vaccinated. It's okay. And at the same time, Brexit's in the back. It's in the back burner because everybody's worried about COVID. Once we have dealt with COVID and people realise that it wasn't COVID that was stopping all these market stock from collapsing, that it was Brexit, then I think there'll be a terrible price to pay for the Tory party. But for now, yeah, it's to blame for everything, I think.
Yeah, so do you think the Tory government is actually hiding Brexit behind COVID in a way?
I think it's doing it deliberately, but I also think it's just
Right.
the natural way of things.
Mm,
COVID is the most important thing that we have to deal with. I mean, we're talking about people's immediate lives here, so that's the most important thing. But the whole of UK society, Scottish society, in terms of what we're talking about, has been absolutely battered by Brexit, and it's never going to be the same. We're going to have to build it up to be whatever it is going to be. I'm not saying it's going to be worse. I'm just saying it's never
mm.
going to be the same. We had relationships that we will only be able to build again when we're independent, because who's going to want to talk to a member of the UK? So I think it's going to be a long time before we have those relationships again, although I know that governments in Europe understand where we are and where we're coming from. So that helps when it comes to building those relationships again.
Brilliant. Well, we'll move on to our last story of this evening, and that is the
Okay.
Gaelic language plan. So the public are being asked for their views on the Scottish Government's Gaelic language plan, which looks to support and ensure the sustainable future of the language. The consultation considers proposals on how the Scottish Government can support the development of Gaelic and promote the use and delivery of the language in the daily business of the organisation. The consultation, which opens today and will run for 8 weeks, closes on the 9th of September. So James, do you know any Gaelic yourself?
Not a single word. Uh, and yet Glasgow has got quite a few Gaelic schools now, a number of Gaelic schools, and it's becoming more and more popular. I mean, I speak to constituents who I speak to a number of parents from England who are up here and have got their kids at Gaelic school. And I find that amazing, and they love the language and they want to immerse the child in it. And they're right that learning another language is always a great thing for a young child to do. I think it's a great grounding for anything that they go on to do. So I'm delighted that how we've been doing with the Gaelic language. Some of the criticisms that we hear are usually from disgusted of Darlington or something. You know what I mean? It's they would be unhappy with anything, but I think it's important for Scotland. I also think it's good for Scottish tourism and that. But I think it's important for Scotland's heritage that they continue to teach Gaelic, and Gaelic still plays a huge role in Scotland.
Oh, yeah, definitely. No, I kind of wish I was taught Gaelic at school. I mean, but do you think this could be a possibility in the future that Gaelic will be taught in all schools?
Well, why not? I mean, I think that I see it's on Duolingo now. I don't know if you're allowed to say that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's others available. Blah blah blah. But so it is becoming more popular and more easy to obtain. But why not? You know, I as I says, I think that the value of languages at an early age is a great thing. And why not Gaelic? Because at the end of the day, to a great extent, it doesn't matter what other language you learn. It seems to be that it improves your capability of taking things in. So, yeah, why not make it Gaelic?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, James. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you.
My pleasure, Rebecca.
Anyway, so that is all for this evening. So thank you to everyone watching at home as well. If you would like to support Broadcasting Scotland, then just follow the link at the bottom of your screen now, appearing just now hopefully, and the more of you who support us, the more programmes that we can make for you. Thanks again for watching.
How do you mean no more commission?
Well, no one in Scotland can commission an idea. You know, if I went to BBC Scotland and I said, oh, I've got this great idea for a sitcom, I've got this brilliant idea for a drama, you know, no, there isn't one person in Scotland that can okay it unless it goes through London.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Full Scottish. What's happening today?
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
That need, that desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014. So there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon, as our First Minister, has been doing.
My feeling about Boris Johnson is he can't be trusted on anything.
That is now and forever will be known as the rape clause.
I'm old enough to remember going into Europe in '73, and I remember how much of a razor's edge that was a battling stone. And I think we made it by 53%, if I remember correctly, for going in. And ever since that time, England particularly has been pretty much schizophrenic, down the middle about whether it felt British or whether it felt European. And that schism, that crack has remained throughout English society ever since.
Scotland means business. Scotland's voice won't be stilled, it won't be silenced, it has to be heard.
About the work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.